Hi, I'm Allie Hamilton, and I'm so happy to welcome you to the Come As You Are podcast. Every week, we'll be talking about some aspect of healing, usually around childhood wounds and complicated familial relationships. The topics will always coincide with my personal essay of the week, and this will be a place where we can take a deep dive together. I'm so thrilled you've joined me and delighted for you to always come as you are. Hi there. Hi there. Welcome to our talk. This week, the topic is All at Once, and the subtitle is Time Travel Jet Lag. And this is a talk about loss and grief, uncertainty, and also time and the way that we tend to think about our lives in this linear fashion. Like life begins when we're born and there's this, timeline that's happening, and it ends when we die. And the older I've gotten and the more things that I've been through, I really don't I don't think of time in that way anymore. I really feel more of a sense that time is sort of folding in on itself, that it's more circular than linear, that there are experiences that we have that are such defining moments. It's almost like those moments are continuing on some timeline still to this day, and that every version of ourselves we've ever been is still alive inside of us, and those versions sometimes run through the hallways and sometimes that's a great thing, kind of like inspires joy or breaks us out of a pattern of thinking, and sometimes there's some scared kid version of you that starts to try to take over decision making. So it's just good to be aware of these things, right? And these ideas as you're moving through your life. And I'm going to kind of start by talking about my childbirth experience with my son. And I always hesitate to do this just in case there's anyone who is pregnant listening. I want to say that I think birth plans are wonderful. Just like anything in life, I think it is always a good idea to kind of have a vision of how you want things to go, so that you can be intentional day to day, so you can really be thinking about, okay, if long term what I'm trying to do is share my perspective or share some insight I might have about one thing or another in any of the multiple ways you might go about doing that. What am I doing today? Am I sort of like moving the needle toward in that direction? But I'm not really a fan of like a 5-year plan if you're trying to think about it in a literal fashion, because I have just found over time that, the minute you make a plan, first of all, you're closing off pathways in your mind for other alternatives and other paths that might be more fulfilling. And second, usually things don't go totally according to plan. So when I got pregnant with my son, I have been writing my whole life. I've been teaching yoga for 30 years, 27 years, practicing for 30 years or something like that, a long time. When you have been teaching yoga for a long time and you get pregnant, people start sending you videos of like women by the ocean shore, squatting down, giving birth with like dolphins frolicking in the background, and really telling you how, women have been doing this for forever and you don't need any kind of help and all of that. So there's a lot of pressure about the way that you are going to go through your childbirth experience. Now, for me personally, then you weigh all those messages against what's comfortable for you. And I I really didn't want intervention. I really did want to see if I could just, do this myself. I wanted to be moving around during my labor, certainly doing some yoga, listening to my body, trying to work with my body, trying to just bring this baby earthside, that's the mindset I was in. So I had a very extensive birth plan, but I was in the hospital because my personality is such, I wanted that structure there in place in case anything went wrong. And I had everyone sign off on my birth plan. My doctor, the hospital, the nursing staff, everyone. And it was, don't talk to me about drugs. I want as little intervention as possible. I want low lights. I'm bringing my own music. I want to be able to move around the room. I had this whole thing going on. And I ended up having a baby who was literally almost 9 pounds, and he's a big kid with a big head. So things did not go as planned. Nothing went as planned. I went in and it just went sideways. About 7 hours in, things were kind of going according to my plan for the first 7 hours, and then everything just kind of came to a halt. And then things started to get really, really scary. And so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I am going to say that for the following 7 hours, I did not know if I was going to make it. I didn't know if my son was going to make it. It was, there were teams of people in the room. A lot of things started to happen that were certainly not part of my birth plan, and were terrifying for me. And I got to a point where I was so scared, and where any attachment I had to my plan was gone. The only thing I cared about was both of us living. That was it. And nothing else mattered to me. And when I realized even that is not in my control, even if I submit to whatever, even that is not going to be up to me. I felt more fragile than I've ever felt in my life, more vulnerable. I started to, for a long time in the labor, the only word in my head was please. And then after a while, I just started to pray, really, though I'm not someone who believes in a man in the sky with a ledger. But, I just began to sort of pray into the ethers that whichever way we were going to go together. And that is how desperate I became. Okay, whatever's going to happen here, just let us go together. I could not bear the thought of anything else. And there were, a lot of reasons for that. But luckily, thankfully, we did make it. We're both here. We're both healthy, and all is well. And I even ended up doing it again a couple of years later. But it did not go according to my plan. And I really understood in a way that I hadn't before that it is like a veil. It's sometimes described as a veil between life and death. And I got a crash course in that reality, that where we tend to think of death as this very finite thing, it really is just right through like a membrane almost. You could almost just stick your hand out and, and touch it. And I learned after the experience that there is a saying in Swahili that at the time of birth, the mother's grave opens for a moment. And of all the things that I heard, that was the most apt description of my experience. And, unfortunately, a week and a half before that my son's birth, my dog, oh gosh, I might start crying. My dog he was 12. He woke up one morning and he had been fine. And he just woke up one morning and he couldn't walk in a straight line. And I raced him to the vet with my then husband, and they took him in. They wouldn't let me in back because I was pregnant. I was about to have a baby, and they had all kinds of drugs and things they were trying to figure out. There was a dog back there having surgery, so they wouldn't let me in back. And after 45 minutes, the vet came out, and she brought us into the room, and she started throwing x-rays up on the screen, and she was saying his lungs are clear, this is clear, that's clear. He had just had a senior profile done a few months before, and everything looked really good. But then she put an x-ray up on the screen of his stomach, and she was showing me there's a cloudy mass there, and she thought he had a tumor that was bleeding out. And I couldn't make what she was saying make sense. And she, unfortunately, was not someone who she was having a very difficult time delivering this news. She couldn't make eye contact with me. She was sort of flying around the room. She was saying a lot of things, but she wasn't able to stop and look at me and explain. And so I was, of course, I was beside myself, and I said, he's going to make it though, right? And she said to me, he's losing strength every moment, and you need to take him to the emergency vet. And that's when I realized, how precarious things were. And so we raced over to the emergency vet, pulled into the parking lot, and they met us with a stretcher. And, my dog weighed 150. He was a big dog. They put him on the stretcher. I'm 8 months, 3 weeks pregnant. I'm running alongside the stretcher into the hospital. They're having me sign, papers. And so I'm signing these papers, and then they take me into the room, and they're doing chest compressions on him like they would do on a human being. And he's looking at me. And I can't even explain the absolute heartbreak, and they got him back. And then the vet started talking to me about okay, he has this mass bleeding out in his stomach. I can bring him in for emergency surgery right now. I can't promise you, but we can try to save him. And I'm okay, great. And as we're having that conversation, he crashed again. I go back out, they're doing more chest compressions. And the second time they saved him, but then they had a machine breathing for him. And at that point, the vet said to me, this is no longer a viable situation. I'll do it for you if you want, but he's not going to live through the surgery. And if by some miracle he did, his quality of life he's going to be suffering. And I just realized it was time to say goodbye. Okay, this is 17 years ago, and I just can't even, if you've ever had a great dog, this dog was like my child. I hadn't had children yet. He had been through so many things with me. I saved him. He was dying when I met him, but he totally turned around and saved me harder and more. And so I just couldn't believe that I had to let him go, that that was it, and so I said, okay, I didn't want him to suffer. And I held him, and I thanked him, and I was sobbing, and they gave him an injection, and I just watched the light go out in his eyes. So that had just happened. And then a week and a half later, I'm going through this other, experience that was nothing like what I had anticipated. And so it just really, there was so much, it was such a giant lesson in vulnerability and in loss of control. And it almost made me feel wildly naive that I had handed a birth plan to like all these people and made them sign it as if it was up to me. It was like, oh, I'm going to talk about how this birth is going to go. It's kind of not any different than like writing a plan for the ocean for the week. Okay, this is how the tides are going to be this week. I'm going to make my plan, and I'm going to go down and tell the ocean what's going to happen. It's like, and again, that's not to say I don't regret having a plan and having a vision. I just wish that I hadn't been so attached to it, because I think the attachment to the plan caused me a lot of pain, and attachment in general leads to suffering. It's one of the Buddhist teachings, but it's a teaching everywhere, right? Any meaningful spiritual practice is going to talk about how attachment leads to suffering, and the reason that it does is because we are not in control. I am not driving the bus of my life. I'm just trying to figure out like how to navigate the day, and how to deal with whatever shows up in the path in front of me. But I'm not like the person in control of the route all the time. Like sometimes you're going down a certain road and then there's like rock fall, and you've got to divert quickly and figure out the detour. Like that's life. So you can certainly sort of like have a plan and have a vision and try to live intentionally, but things are gonna go a lot better if you realize that there are probably going to be a lot of surprises along the way and things that are not part of your plan. And so that experience, right as I sort of entered this realm of motherhood of like, this is not up to you, it was intense. It was a very big, profound, in my face kind of lesson. And what happened is I went home with this tiny, tiny human being, and I think there was a lot of trauma from the birth and also from losing my dog and all of those things. And I just had so much fear, that like something could happen to him. And I was absolutely doing like attachment parenting and wearing the baby and nursing and co-sleeping. And I was just like, and part of it was I did really feel that was what felt right for me. It's not for everyone. And I'm very much like, this is a personal thing. It's not like you go home from the hospital with a manual of how to do it right. You got to figure it out for yourself and for your family and for your life. But for me, those things felt right. But there was also a lot of fear there, of like trying to keep him safe. And those are real feelings for everyone. You come home with this tiny infant and it's like, I think most people have a sense as they're driving home from the hospital, if they went to the hospital, like, really, I am being entrusted with this tiny human being, and like there's no there aren't any instructions, or like, I don't know, there are no tests, or there's nothing that you have to take to sort of graduate, to get your license, there's nothing. You're just like sent home with a whole human being. So I think most people feel some sense of that, the enormity and the profound responsibility that it is. But I do think that all of that loss and lack of control, and for me, when you come out of trauma, and I've written about it a lot and I've talked about it a lot, but my childhood, there was a lot of uncertainty as I was growing up, and a lot of trying to read the room and figure out how to make myself safe and how to, make other people happy, and how to diffuse, a ticking time bomb. And just a lot of, grew up, part of my history is just growing up in an alcoholic household at my mom's, and she would she was scary when she drank when I was little and as I was growing up. So I had a lot of that, and my dad had a flash temper as well. So it was just it's a lot of volatility around me as I was growing that I think also, when you grow up with a lot of that uncertainty and fear, you then want to control things and try to avoid those explosions, right? You're trying to avoid the pitfalls and the potholes and the falling rocks and and you're trying to somehow white knuckle your way through and think if you do everything right, then you'll be okay. Or if you're a good person, all those good deeds are like going into sort of like the good deed bank and nothing bad will happen. Well, it doesn't work like that, right? I assume and imagine we're all old enough to understand devastating things happen to beautiful human beings every day of the week, every hour in the day. There isn't this quid pro quo, it just does not work like that. And so I realized at a certain point that I was going to have to figure out how to have more faith, more trust, more belief that everything was going to be okay than fear. That I had to try to cultivate this sense of just hope and joy, that this little human being existed, and make it about that and try to let go of the fear part, not that you ever let go of it completely. He's 17 now and I don't sleep till he's home. I'm a human being, but I've really tried over the years to stop the tape. If I start imagining worst case scenarios, which I used to do, I used to run these horrible worst case scenarios in my mind, and I think a lot of people do this, and it's like you're almost rehearsing for disaster as I don't even know if it's like a defense mechanism to try to just prepare yourself in the horrible chance that something like absolutely devastating would happen, or if it is a trauma response. I don't, but it is common. I know from having written about it that a lot of people do that. And I learned how to, and this is part of one of the great sort of gifts of a yoga practice and a meditation practice. And those are really the same thing. Yoga is just a moving meditation. One of the greatest gifts is just the ability to choose one thought over another. To give one thought more importance than another thought. And so I learned how to, if I would start running this tape in my head of something I don't even want to name, I would stop it and I would replace it with just something better. Dancing at my son's wedding or watching him graduate from high school or whatever it is, whether he ever gets married or not. I would try to replace the tape, put a better movie on. If I was going to have a daydream, I was going to make it like a good daydream, and that would sort of stop the intrusive thinking. And it worked. I for the most part, I can say that it's something I worked on the first year of his life, 2 years, 3 years, and I had to keep working on it. Whenever you have something that's deeply ingrained, you're probably not going to get over it in a minute, but like anything else, the more these things are brought into your awareness, the more you can work with them and work through them. When things are happening, underneath the surface, you can't do anything about it because you're not aware. So this week I was writing about a weekend that I had not quite a year ago when I went back to my hometown, New York City, where I grew up. And if I've ever had a this is your life weekend, that was it, and I started the weekend by going to my Aunt Louise's house. And my best childhood memories happened in the first 4 years of my life before my maternal grandmother died. And prior to that, we spent a lot of time at the Jersey Shore with my aunt and uncle and my 4 cousins and my nanny, my grandmother, and my mom and my dad. And, we were just there a lot. My nanny she would come into the city. She lived in Jersey City, but she had a beach house at the Jersey Shore right near the amusement park. It was so ideal. It was across the street from the beach, and seagulls overhead, and she had a little backyard where she grew tomatoes. I mean, it was it was ideal. It was idyllic. And she would sing me to sleep and tickle my face. She was just like a big, love in a human being. And so the first 4 years were really, I had a lot of love and a lot of family around and a lot of affection, and going to my aunt and uncle's house was always the best because my cousins were I'm trying to think, one of them is, I think the smallest gap is 6 years, 7 years, 8 years maybe. No. It's 11 years. I know that for a fact. Okay, so I had 11 years between my oldest cousin. Is that right? I think that's right. Anyway, there was a gap there. I was the baby, so it was great. I would go, and I had these 4, preteen teenagers who just doted on me and loved me, and they would fight over whose bed I was sleeping in. It was the best. And there was a finished basement, and there were tons of board games and hide and seek and an overstuffed couch, and we'd watch movies. It was you couldn't really ask for more safety, security, love, and all of that. And then my grandmother died, and kind of everything just went away. I certainly didn't know, and I don't know if anyone understood how much my grandmother was holding the whole thing together. My parents had been keeping up appearances. Their marriage was not viable any longer. And so my grandmother died. The next week my dad left. And I think my mom felt embarrassed or ashamed or, whatever it was, to talk to her family about what had happened. And so she did not lean on them. So I didn't see them nearly as much as I had before. Once the dust settled and she was doing the single mom thing, she would take me there and drop me off for the weekend. And I was I think starting when I was 5, 6. So I would see them, but it was just much less. It wasn't all the time anymore. It was sort of maybe once a month or once every 2 months or something like that. And then eventually my mom got remarried, and then I didn't see them really very much at all for far too long. And until I got old enough to, get myself there on my own. And so I went back to New York, and my mother had died at this point. So my mother passed away at the end of 2021. I'm still grappling with whether I like the term passed away. But anyway, my mother died at the end of 2021. And it was absolutely devastating. And I will start crying again if I talk about it. So she got ALS out of nowhere, and it just took her. It took her in a year, and it was brutal. And I was with her for the last month of her life in the ICU, and my Aunt Louise came, and she came the first day that my mother was in the hospital, and then she came back a second time. She's gotten older now, and but it was unbelievable. She came into the room, and my mother was on a ventilator. She had tubes everywhere. It was just, I cannot describe the pain of watching someone you love in that condition. She was just, it was awful. And so my Aunt Louise walks into the room, and I can see her. I had warned her, prepare yourself because it's brutal. And she went right over to my mother. And I mean, I wish I could do justice to the way they looked at each other, but it was just pure love, my poor mother, I think, had been trying to stay strong. But I could see like the fear just flood into her eyes when she looked at my Aunt Louise, because I think she felt safe, to like express that, share that. And my Aunt Louise had known my mother since my mother was 11. So she watched my mother grow up, and she was the closest thing. I mean, she's the only one left. My mother's brother had died. He died when I was 17. It was very sudden. He had a really sudden heart attack. He was 53. I mean, it was just, my mom's she went through a lot of traumatic loss, and it definitely had an impact on her. So my Aunt Louise was the last person left who had known my mother when she was growing up. And I mean, there's just a tremendous amount of love there. And I could see how comforting it was for my mother to have my Aunt Louise there. And my Aunt Louise then, of course, turns all of that like comforting, loving energy, toward me. And we knew. I mean, I knew looking at her that day. We didn't talk about it. Like, we both knew it wasn't going to be okay. We knew. So I hadn't seen my Aunt Louise since that day. I went back to Los Angeles, and then my Aunt Louise had a stroke later in the year. And my cousin Diane called to tell me, and I just realized that I have reached the time in life where you do start losing people that you do not know how to live without. You just don't. It's like it is really the most vulnerable, the hardest part of being a human being is the loss, right? The loss of like whole human beings. Now, thankfully, my Aunt Louise was okay. She had a stroke, but they caught it, and she went right into rehab, and she was okay. She was back home. So my cousin Diane picks me up at the airport. I go and spend the night at my Aunt Louise's house for the first time in, decades, since I'd been like 6 or 7 years old. And it was wild. I have that house memorized in my mind. I know every nook and cranny, but it's half the size I thought it was, Like, all the details are right, but it's like half size. And that's because I'm twice as big. I'm twice as tall, and it's a trippy experience. It is like walking through a time portal. It's very much like time travel. And she hadn't changed very much at all, except for the basement, which was that finished basement where we had the pool table and the overstuffed couch and the, all of that. The toy closet and the board games is now a guest suite, and that's where I was going to be sleeping. So I'm sleeping in this place that I like grew up in, and spent the night with my Aunt Louise, which was just amazing. And it was wild. I didn't want to leave. My trips back east are short, because even though my children are teenagers, they still need me, even if they think they don't. And so I spent the night, and I got up in the morning, and I had this plan. And I had dinner with my cousin and her son. Like, we all went out it was great. It was amazing. But I had this plan that I had some of my mother's ashes, and I had already spread them when I went to Tuscany. I led a yoga retreat to Tuscany in like the summer of 22, and I spread some of her ashes around this beautiful olive tree in this vineyard. I thought that was very fitting. My mom liked wine, and it was just beautiful. You really could not find like a more gorgeous setting, so I thought she would like that. And then I spread some on that same trip. We went to her best friend had this like incredible chateau in France, and so I went there and spread some ashes around a tree in her best friend's backyard, which was also something I thought she would like. But my mother did not have a will, and this is another thing to just talk about for a moment. She was I think the years of alcoholism, her denial muscle was so strong that she refused to accept. For a long time, she refused to accept the ALS diagnosis, and she was blaming me for her loss of speech and all these things that had happened, and that's going in the memoir, so you can you can read about that later. But she just wasn't going to accept the diagnosis, and then even after she accepted the diagnosis, she wasn't going to accept that it was going to do her in. She really felt like she was just going to fight this thing. And so I did try, like, once in a while to have conversations with her about, like, just so I know, like, what are your wishes? But she was just not going to have those conversations. The only thing that we knew for sure is that she wanted to be cremated. Other than that, she had nothing written down, except for there's just one other thing that she had sort of like expressed clearly what she wanted. But it was rough, so it's kind of guessing, and that's a lot of responsibility to leave behind. And so one of the first things that I did was just make sure that my wishes were like set down somewhere, because it's a burden that you remove from the people that you leave behind. It's a good thing to really think about. I know it's uncomfortable, and in our culture we don't like to talk about death. We just sort of like, we push it to the side, and we all know that, like, human beings don't last forever. Maybe, I don't know, maybe you get 100 years, 108. I just saw someone in one of my social media feeds talking about how her dad was about to be 107, which is amazing. My dad passed away over the summer. He was 96. If you're lucky, some of it is genetics, some of it is luck, and some of it is how you take care of yourself. It's not one thing. You can do everything right and still, boom. So, but we don't like to talk about it. We know that we don't last forever, but I think culturally we just kind of push that down. And not everyone, but it's just not in the discourse a lot. And so I think it's one of the reasons we feel so shocked when we lose people. I think it's shocking no matter what, and I don't think there's any way to prepare for it. But I think that we could probably do ourselves a favor if we did just talk about it a little bit more. So there's that, and also plan for it, and think about it a little bit, at least, like, how can I make my wishes known so that when the people I leave behind are in the depths of their grief, they're not trying to figure out what to do for me, or, guess at what it is that I wanted. And I had to do a lot of that for my mom. And one of the things that I realized is that I should spread some of her ashes at her mother's grave. I just knew in my, like, entire being she would want that. She would want to be with her mother. And in whatever ways you think this matters, I understand we're talking about someone's ashes, but whatever energetic, symbolic way, I just had a feeling like, I know she would love this. I know it. And so I asked my cousin, where is Nanny buried? And it's strange to me that we never went. And I don't know, I guess everyone grieves in their own way, and maybe, like, going to a graveyard isn't the way for a lot of people. I don't know, but I had never been there, and I don't recall my mom going, so I don't know, but she's there now. So I went and I found it. My cousin found the plot, like there's depending on how big the cemetery is, I guess there are different. This one is massive. I didn't realize how big it was until I got there. It's very old. I can't remember the year. There was somebody who caretaker that I met while I was there, and he told me the year, and I just can't remember. I don't want to say the wrong thing, but it's very old and massive, miles, just in every direction, and beautiful, just like trees everywhere and a lot of shade, and just the stones, everything. It's not perfect. It's not like everything's like perfectly, lined up or anything. It's kind of beautiful. I mean, I know that might sound, I don't know, whatever it sounds, but it was kind of shockingly beautiful. And so I'm there with my carry-on bag because I'm going to go from the cemetery into the city. And I am like rolling my carry-on bag along, trying to figure out where this, and realizing like I could be walking for hours, like and miles. I don't know, how I'm going to do this. And this caretaker pulled up in a pickup truck and asked me if I needed help. And I showed him my printout, and he was like, just get in, it's far. Let me just drive you. And he did. He drove me and pointed me in the right direction. Off I went, and he said, I'll be coming back this way in not too long if you need a ride back to the gate. And I don't normally just like get in cars with strange men, but like it was just clearly like this person was so kind and so lovely and so wonderful, and showed up at exactly the right moment that later I was like, wow, it almost felt like not real, like the ghost of a caretaker in his pickup truck taking people to the graveside of their loved ones. So I found it, and I don't know, I didn't see another soul there the entire day. I didn't see anyone else walking around, and I scattered my mother's ashes at her mother's grave, and it was wildly emotional. I just completely let myself break down and talk to my grandmother and talk to my mother. And then I went into the city. And that's a trip, right? Going to the house where I grew up. It's a building on the Upper West Side. It's like where I grew up, and my mother isn't there anymore. And that is really strange because she was in that apartment for like 50 years. And it's a strange experience to visit and have her not be there. Although, I always find things. And I'm like I come in and I go through yet another closet and more photos. I'm that person in the family where I'm just like organizing things and saving things and figuring out, doing all that stuff. So, and I'm actually about to go to New York again, and I know I'll be doing probably the last round of that. But I found all these photographs and it was amazing. And I sent another box of my mother's things to myself, in Los Angeles. And so there's just something really, it's this idea of how much of who we are is shaped by who our parents were, and I'm writing about this in the memoir, just like this idea of how much of my identity and how much of what defines me is based on particularly like who my mother was. And some of it is in the ways that I moved against how she was and who she was. And some of it is the ways that I moved toward it. Like it's that thing of all of our, people who set up the motherboard and push the buttons, right? Like there are things about most of our families of origin that are really painful and difficult and challenging. And then there are things that are beautiful and wonderful. And so the ways we're moving toward the things that we love and away from and against the things that are painful and hurtful and disappointing or heartbreaking or abusive or whatever it may be. And so anyway, there's all of that. And then the next day I met up with all the kids that I went to elementary school with that I'm still in contact with, and there's like 15 of us. And we went from first grade to sixth grade. So 6 years old to 13. I grew up with these people. It was like the 20 of us kind of went through this tiny school together. There's only 80 kids in the whole school. And about 15, 20 of us reconnected during the pandemic, and we Zoomed a few times, which was unbelievable. And then we decided we're going to just try to have an impromptu reunion. And so we met at our school. We had a tour of the current principal, and that was insane. I mean, it was just like I'm walking around my elementary school, and it was great to do it with other people because it's that same thing of this place is frozen in time in my mind, and it's half as big as I thought it was. It's wild. And it very much is, again, like time travel. It's like you're going back, you're a different you, but that kid you is still in there. That kid you who walked through these walls still exists inside you. And it's kind of like, oh, where are we? Are you kidding? Are we here? This is wild, And it was amazing. And there's something about the people who knew you when you were little and the people that you knew and how they are also kind of like frozen in time. When I look at these people, and I'm about to see a bunch of them too when I go back to New York, like they look like the kid version to me. I don't know if it's the same for them when they're looking at me. I imagine it is, but I see like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old Jessie. I don't see, 53-year-old Jessie. Like it's wild. Or Sam, like I see Sam in the same way I saw Sam when we were in like, 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade. Like that's the Sam that I'm seeing, or I mean, everyone. So there's just something kind of like, I don't want to say magical, but it's pretty wild. It's pretty interesting and powerful. And so I did that. And then I, of course, am spending the night in the bedroom that I grew up in until my brother was born. Then I gave him that bedroom and I moved to a smaller bedroom. But I was sleeping in the old bedroom. And so I'm like in my old room, and I woke up and I had the most violent migraine I've had in decades. I mean, like where you're just, please take me out of my body. Like I can't do this. Like it's so intense. And normally, if I get migraines, they're very easily managed with medication. It's not like a problem in my life at this point. It was when I was like a young adult, trying to figure out how to handle them and what to do. But I've pretty much figured that out. And it was just like, it didn't matter what I did. It was just unreal. And so it occurred to me that, I probably stirred up a whole bunch of stuff, a whole bunch of old stuff had like come flooding to the surface. All these neural pathways, were probably like back online a little bit. And it's just the system, it was like a system overload. Thankfully I was able to reach my doctor and, I got through it. I didn't die. But I was also talking about that. Not everybody has had that experience of intense physical pain as a sort of, maybe you've broken a bone or something. It's like that. It's like having a broken bone in your head where you're just, or a vice grip, it's so brutal. And when that pain starts to subside and you can recognize that you're going to live and it's going to be okay and you're not going to be in that state forever, the gratitude that floods through your body, the absence of pain is just like so, I don't even know how to describe the gratitude. You want to kiss the ground. You're like, okay, I'm back, like I want to live again. And so that I experienced that as well. And that experience reminds me, when you've gone through like major heartbreaks in your life, like where you just didn't know if you were going to make it, like you didn't know if you were going to be okay. And you had months of just waking up and like before you could even really get your eyes open, remembering the situation that you're in and what you're dealing with and just struggling to do anything, like get out of bed or do anything. And then, months go by, whatever it is, and maybe you wake up one day and you get like 5 minutes or 7 minutes, like you actually make it out of bed and maybe brush your teeth before you think about it, and just that little gap of relief is the thing that reassures you like you're going to get through it, and I wanted to really write about it and talk about it because there is no doubt that we're all going to go through major loss and uncertainty in our lives. It is part of the equation. of being human. And it's the thing that makes us really vulnerable, is that we don't get to know, we don't get to know how much time we have, or how much time anyone else has, or what's going to happen, or we just don't get to know all these things. And you can kind of, collapse or resist or feel overwhelmed at the reality of that, or you can just see if you can embrace it, and say like, okay, I mean, there's no point fighting this reality. It just is. It's the waters that we swim in, and if that's the case, how can I swim in these waters in the way that how can I sort of try to ride these waves, right? Alan Watts, how can I ride the wave instead of fighting the current or getting sucked under or feeling like I'm treading water all the time and I can't possibly keep going. How do I figure this out? And certainly in my own life, I have begun to understand in the last number of years, especially as I've gone through a lot of loss and a lot of grief, and just in the middle years, right? I'm in the middle years. I've got the teenage kids. I've got my parents are both gone. My dad just this past July, and my mom, as I said, at the end of 21. But even before that, all the things along the way, as you hit these years, those losses are they flow through you like a river, they inform your human experience. You're aware that life is fleeting, and the ground is not always solid underneath your feet. And if you can get into a headspace of okay, I might not love that, but that is this ride. That's what it is. It's part of it. And the more that I accept that and open to it, the less I'm going to suffer. Otherwise it's you're trying to dig your nails into the water. You're trying to grab onto the ocean as the waves are rolling in and the waves are rolling out, and there's nothing to grab. It's just, water running through your fingers. And if you can get into that mindset of okay, this is it's a dance, right? We're all arriving on this earth, we're going back into the earth, we're stardust, we're all part of the same whole experience here. And so when you wash up onto the shore and you have your 100 years, you want to use them. You want to use them wisely and absorb all the beauty and create all the beauty that you can, and love your heart out and allow yourself to be surprised, and not try to cling so tightly or plan so hard or white knuckle your way so much, but instead just to open your hands and open your heart and open your mind and let go, let go and try to move in the direction of the things that just inspire you and feel compelling and feel like they're going to shift your way of thinking about something, or even the way you're thinking about yourself, and to try to be to welcome change, to recognize that when the ground shifts underneath you, it might not be comfortable, but something amazing is going to happen. It's some new adventure is on the horizon or underfoot or on the way, or some new learning or some new growth or, deeper insight. Not all of it's great. Let's be real here. Sometimes the changes are not wanted, and, and it's painful and your heart breaks, and you've got to kind of pick up the pieces of your life and reimagine, recreate, start again. But that's part of the meditation practice, right? Your mind wanders, you pick it up, you start again. So these are all things that you can practice for. And I do think practicing makes it a lot easier when it happens. But, there's just something so freeing and beautiful when you can not only recognize those, younger versions of yourself that are still, like I said, like running through the halls, that would love to have a conversation with you as you are right now. It's not like you can't do that. You can access your 13-year-old self or your 16-year-old self or your 5-year-old self. You can access those younger versions of you and like have a little conversation. There's nothing stopping you except maybe like feeling like that's a weird thing to do, but it's not. I mean, think about life and think about the world right now. Okay? It's really not, like, it's not. And actually it's very healing. And also not boxing yourself in, and not deciding, okay, well, I'm in my middle years, like I'm 53, so that's it. I've kind of figured out who I am and I know how the rest of my life's going to unfold. I don't know what's going to happen. I have no idea. I have ideas, but I don't have any fixed idea of what's going to happen. I just don't know, because life keeps coming. And the minute you think you have it figured out is the minute you're going to go for a serious ride, And yeah, so just as much as you can is to try to make space for the uncertainty, and and let yourself be, I don't know, don't make too many decisions about who you are, like what kind, what you would do or what you would never do, or like just try to, like, that's part of the yoga practice too, this idea of pratyahara, which is usually it's usually translated as withdrawal of the senses. So, and some of you listening might not do yoga, and it's totally fine. But if you happen to do yoga, then there's this part of in the beginning of your practice and throughout it, but like the beginning, you're really trying to establish these things. You've got a focal point and you're trying to just listen to the sound of your own breathing, and you're doing your best to pay attention to sensation that's happening in your body, to be really curious about it. The reason for that is just that sensation's always occurring in the here and now. And the more that you're able to use those focal points and pay attention to your breath and stay curious about sensation, the less you're stuck up in your mind with all of your like very hard and fast ideas about things and your strong opinions about what you like and what you don't like and what you would do and what you would never do, and all these. And the literal translation, pratyahara, is away from food. But it's that food, it's that mind food of like the strong likes and dislikes. And so when you get on your mat, the idea is I'm going to just drop all that for a little bit, and I'm going to train my mind and my, nervous system and all of my senses. I'm going to try to attune them to what is happening right here, right now, and give myself a little break from all that stuff I've decided about things, about myself, about other people, about what's happening, about the world. Just going to try to move away from all that noise for a little bit and just be and see what happens. And that's good advice for life, right? Just be yourself and see what happens, and it'll probably go a lot better than if you got a whole plan that you're making people sign off on all the time. So I hope this talk was helpful to you and meaningful, and that I'm easy to find. I try to be really easy to find. I read every comment. Sometimes it takes me a little bit of time because there's just one of me, but I don't delegate. I read myself, I respond. It is so meaningful to me, all of it, wherever you're meeting me, whether it's on the Come As You Are or wherever it is, like and I am engaging over there a lot, like those comments over there. I spend a lot of time there because people are reading and thinking and saying the most thoughtful and amazing things, and so that's a good place to get me. But you can get me anywhere. If you're not okay, or you need a little support or some love, I am around, and I do, I genuinely care. So I'm sending you lots of love, and I'll see you next time.